to stay out of the house, then what the foundation will do is put in qualified tenants into the property and take the rents from that property and use it to fund the foreclosure litigation on behalf of those homeowners that have moved out. The nice thing about that is that the homeowners then get one of the best litigation teams available to fight on their behalf without having to take any money out of their pocket.
Really? Wait a second. So you do this at, you're the advocate for the homeowners without having, they don't have to pay anything up front to implement the Foreclosure Advocacy Foundation doesn't require any upfront cost to this?
There's no upfront cost. Now, in the situation that you just talked about, the home is vacant.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to turn around and get the property in rent-ready condition if it's not already, and then bring that tenant in and collect the rents and use that money from the rents that we collect in order to fund the litigation. If the homeowner wants to stay in their home, and they are in their home at that point, there is no upfront fees, but there is a flat monthly fee that they'll pay for the services that the Foreclosure Rescue Foundation provides.
Oh, okay, so what else, how does that work? Do they call, is there a website? What would the website be? How do they contact the homeowner, the Foreclosure Rescue Foundation? Okay,
the Foreclosure Rescue Foundation has a website, and it's www.foreclosurerescuefoundation.org, and that's our main website. The main way, believe it or not, that we bring in our clients is that the foundation has affiliates in almost every state in the nation.
Yeah, okay.
And it's the job of these affiliates to seek out homeowners that are in distress, that are in foreclosure in various stages, or experiencing financial difficulties, and to let them know about the services that the Foreclosure Rescue Foundation can provide. And at that point, they'll send us in the information. We'll do a one-on-one consultation with the homeowner, try to find out what their goals are, educate them into what options are available for them, help them to develop a strategy, and then walk them through the process.
Now, what is one of the biggest frauds that have taken place in the foreclosure process that you've seen, other than the banks letting tenants know that they're being evicted and stuff like that? How does that work? What should they look for when they receive something like that from the bank? How do you know when you should? Is there a legal process that you get, or is it just some piece of letter, in a pink slip or something like that?
Well, depending upon the state that you're in, usually in most cases you have to be personally served.
When you mean by personally served, you mean by?
So in other words, somebody will knock on your door.
Yes.
Okay, and serve you with a summons or a subpoena or a complaint or a notice of default. Okay, so now basically you have been notified that there is a legal action pending against that particular property.
And not, so if you received a letter, very likely just ignore it.
Oh gosh, no.
I mean, not ignore it, but it's not for you to just start packing.
No. And again, the laws varies from state to state. But in Florida, for instance, you have roughly 20 days to answer that particular complaint. But a foreclosure process in Florida, if you don't fight it, may take 3 or 4 months. If you do fight it and you fight it properly, it could take 2 to 3 years on the state level. And then if you have actionable fraud in that contract, probably another 1.5 years at the federal level.
Now, what kind of a fraud, actionable fraud, are you referring to? What have you seen so far that is something that the people that are watching right now might look at and say, hey, that's happened to me as well?
Yeah. There's a variety of different ones. A lot of them people are unaware of. There are a host of TILA violations, which is the Truth in Lending Act. There's a whole host of RESPA violations, which is the Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act. There are violations of HOPA, which is the Home Ownership Equity Protection Act. And a lot of these are made up by the federal government in order to protect homeowners during the buying and selling of properties. For instance, almost all homeowners should receive a HUD-1, which is a statement of all of the expenses that go along with the purchase of a property. And they're supposed to get that at least 24 hours in advance of the closing. They never get them. Never ever. There is a HUD brochure that homeowners are supposed to get that explains the process to them. They never see any of those. Other fraud violations that we see are basically contract fraud, where you've been promised one rate and
Yes.
and given another. And a lot of times
That happens all the time. It's like 3.9%. Oh, by the way, we couldn't get that on that day, so it's now
Yep.
4.2.
Yeah, and they tell you at the last minute when you're sitting at the table and you've got a stack of papers and you're waiting to get into that dream house that that you've always wanted, and you don't want anything to stand in the way. And they know people are like this. And they turn around and they employ these bait and switch tactics. And a lot of times this is not so much done by the lender, but it's done by the mortgage broker.
Ah.
And that needs to be looked at. One of the most serious violations we see is accomplished by the real estate appraisers.
Uh-huh.
Where
In what way?
The houses are overvalued.
Okay.
All right, the houses have been overvalued. They're not worth what the homeowners paid for them.
Yes, yes.
And when you can uncover these types of violations, now you're talking about having some serious ammunition to go back at the bank with and recover your losses.
Now, why do 95% of the people in the United States are not contesting the foreclosure process?
You know what, Anthony, they just don't know any better. They just don't. When people are in trouble like that, the first thing they do is if they don't run away from the problem and hope for a miracle, they'll turn to attorneys. Okay? But in a lot of cases, attorneys won't, give these consultations for free. They have to pay, and a lot of times they don't have the money to do that. The Foreclosure Rescue Foundation doesn't charge for those. They will spend as much time as they need to on the phone with homeowners to explain to them what their options are and what position they're in, okay, and what they can and cannot do in order to accomplish their goals.
Well, you mentioned attorneys. Now, do most attorneys are familiar with some of these processes, or those who are maybe in the real estate side of the business, or is it a special type of attorney that understands the foreclosure process and guide you through it, like your organization, Foreclosure Rescue Foundation?
It's really a specialty area of real estate. There are a lot of real estate attorneys out there that basically practice, the buying and selling of the properties and transfers of ownerships and that type of thing. But for foreclosure litigation or foreclosure defense or prosecuting foreclosures, you're really looking for a litigator, an attorney that knows how to stand on their own 2 feet and fight in a court of law. Unfortunately, most of the attorneys that we come across are sadly lacking in the skills that they need to properly litigate a foreclosure. When the Foreclosure Rescue Foundation first got started, the first thing that we did was we went out and we sought out the best attorneys in the country. And we learned from their materials. We bought everything that they had and we educated ourselves. Then when we went out to open up the attorney network around the country, we started talking to these attorneys and talking about these different strategies and tactics, and the vast majority of them had no idea what we were talking about. We as non-attorneys, with a little bit of effort, had more knowledge at our fingertips than most of the attorneys that were out there. And we call them the 50%ers. They were the attorneys that were out there that knew just enough on how to talk to a homeowner to get them to pay that upfront retainer, okay? And then after 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, do nothing but delay the foreclosure, and then the homeowner loses the house in the process. So it's been a real trek to get to where we are right now, to get what we feel is the best team of foreclosure litigators.
Is that why some attorneys take months and months to process a case, mainly because they're pretty much learning what it is they're supposed to be doing?
Yes and no. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the ones we come across are satisfied with just doing the delay tactics at that point. So most of the delay is because the attorneys for the banks are so overwhelmed with the sheer volume of foreclosures that they just can't get back around to those cases for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. In most cases, it's not the skill of the attorney that delays at that level. It's the court systems that are backed up where you can't get in for 3, 4, 5 months. And it's the fact that the bank's attorneys are overwhelmed with the volume of cases that they have at this point.
Now, what is shadow inventory? I've heard this term bandied around in various ways, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah. Well, first, there's probably about 4 million homes that are foreclosed on usually in the process of a year. And as we discussed earlier, that all depends upon what states where the homes are in and how late those payments are. But shadow inventory is a term that's used for homes that should have been foreclosed on already because they are so far behind in payments, but the banks have not started the foreclosure process yet. And right now we're talking about 6 million homes.
6 million?
6 million homes across the United States right now that are in shadow inventory. And can you imagine what would happen if all of those homes were foreclosed on at the same time and all those houses were to hit the consumer market?
So 6 million homes are in inventory to be more, foreclosed.
Mm-hmm.
So everything we've been hearing is actually a lot worse. And am I reading that correctly? Mm-hmm. That because it actually hasn't hit the real numbers that are actually in foreclosure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people think that we're halfway through or most of the way through this process, and we're not. In fact, we're very far from it. Shadow inventory right now is basically equal to the amount of foreclosures that have happened over the last 3 or 4 years combined.
Wow, that's like insane. Yeah. Now, a while back, a few months ago, there was a 60-minute piece about robo-signing that the banks were a part of. Can you explain robo-signing? What does that mean, and how does it affect, or how did it affect those people that were robo-signed into foreclosure?
What you have to realize is back in the fast and furious days when all this stuff was being done and mortgages were given out to people that it should never have been able to qualify, that the banks were very, very lax on the paperwork. Okay? There was also a company, and there's still a company out there called MERS, which is short for Mortgage Electronic Registration System. And it was MERS' job to basically digitize all this information to effectuate the transfer of all these mortgages into securities and from one lender to another and one investor to another. And one of the things that they did was, as they digitized these documents, they destroyed the originals.
Ah, okay.
And in most states, you have to have the original note and the original mortgage in order to prosecute a foreclosure.
Really?
So now what happened was the lenders and these institutions that held these notes realized that they didn't have the paperwork they needed in order to prosecute all these foreclosures. So now they started making up the documents.
So making up documents. That's what that is.
Well, making up the documents, but robo-signing, basically they had these sweatshops with people in rooms that were signing other people's names to these documents that were purporting to be officers of various banks. And it was all bogus. And to make it even worse, they had other people in there, notaries, that were notarizing those signatures like they were true.
Really?
Now, we knew about this about 2 years ago when we first started this and we were looking into what was going on with the foreclosure market. 60 Minutes, finally got around to doing the story on it right now, but this has been rampant.
Well, why do you think the media has not really picked up on that earlier on when there was evidence that some foul play was happening?
You know what? The wheels turn slowly. Even slower than the media sometimes is the judges that we run up against that don't bother to really take a look at these cases and to realize that just because it's a banking institution doesn't mean that these are fraudulent loans, fraudulent documents, defective documents that they're looking at. And then when the homeowners don't fight, there's no reason for them to have the lenders validate this bogus paperwork that they're putting forth.
Now, can you, is the foundation available to help people in all 50 states?
Almost. The foundation right now is in over 20 states. We're adding, on average, 1 to 2 states every week right now. We have a terrific team of people that are vetting lawyers in different states. And we're working as quickly as we can in order to cover all those states. But remember, we have specific criteria that these attorneys have to meet in order to become part of that network. First and foremost, their practice has to focus on foreclosure defense, foreclosure litigation. That's number one. Number two, they have to be true consumer advocates. Number three, they have to be willing to share their information with other members of the attorney groups that we have, and vice versa, in order to hone their skills on a daily basis to be the best that they can absolutely be. Number four, they have to be willing to put in the proper time it takes to litigate these